Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. Today's review is going to be on some AI terms. So I'm just going to take a quick look at the product. So for this organization, Semrush, this is a very interesting cookie banner. We have two buttons: allow all cookies, which is in green, and then we have do not sell or share my personal information in a different color. Also don't have a reject all cookies. Uniting our leading traditional SEO tools with powerful AI search capabilities. AI answers are reshaping how people discover brands. With Semrush, measure and grow your visibility across Google, ChatGPT, Perplexity, and beyond. Semrush One is where you track, optimize, and win everywhere customers search. One connected solution for Google and AI search, so some type of searching tool. Let's go back to the AI functionality terms. The AI terms apply with respect to your use of the Semrush services and form part of the Semrush terms of service available here, or such applicable agreements between you and Semrush. Let's look at the definitions. I've talked a lot about businesses putting in place definitions so that customers understand what's in scope. It's really important from a privacy perspective to identify what a user could input. Does it constitute personal data, and how a organization or provider is going to fulfill its own obligations under the data protection laws. Every organization that interacts with a third party should conduct its own due diligence. As part of that due diligence, a review of these AI terms is something that businesses should add into their due diligence process. Now, artificial intelligence is essentially being used by all different sorts of organizations at this point. We can see what Semrush does. It provides some type of search capability for organizations. If that's something that's valuable to your business, you should conduct due diligence before signing any type of terms. In addition to that, you should also understand what terms you're actually signing up for from a privacy perspective, because the firm is all about privacy. You're going to probably need other legal review. I think that one thing that's so wonderful about having a specialist attorney who specializes in privacy is every business uses personal data in some capacity. You need to be able to understand the risks associated with joining your organization with another organization that provides you a service, because your responsibilities don't stop just because you've engaged service provider. Generative services output means the created and or edited content insights, recommendation, business descriptions, user input reports provided by Semrush as a result of using AI generative services. User input means any text, image, data, or other content you upload, submit, distribute, and or edit using the AI generative services. Semrush does not train or develop its models and does not allow its third-party providers to train or develop its model on user input. Okay, that's really positive. That's very positive, because other terms that I've reviewed on this channel, they do actually train and develop their models on user input. So I like that is one of the first statements that is being listed here. You retain all rights you may have in user input. Okay, what about the output? You're solely responsible for user input and shall ensure you have all the rights and permissions to make available user input while using the services. In connection with your use of AI generative services, you may receive generative service output generated and returned by the services. You are solely responsible for the distribution, operation, maintenance, and use of user input and generative service output. Now, I am intrigued, and I'll tell you why. This sentence says they don't train or develop their models on the input, but there's no discussion on whether or not they will train and develop their models on the generative services output. Now, I would need more details on what the service actually is. I only got a couple sentences of it from the homepage, but without having insight into that, I'm intrigued about whether or not training and developing of the model is going to happen on the output. I would question why and what type of outputs does the algorithm allow, because that will influence what type of provision should exist within these terms. In connection with your use of AI generative services, you may receive, you're solely responsible for the distribution, notwithstanding any terms to the contrary. Solely to enable us to provide AI generative services, you give us the right to use, store, modify, edit, and delete user input, transfer and make user input available to third-party artificial intelligence service providers. I would question this sentence: improve our AI generative services. What does this organization consider to be improved? Because here they're saying they'll transfer the user input to a third-party artificial intelligence service provider. To me, this reads, now I can't be too sure, but I can have an opinion on the fact that whoever is assisting this organization in updating or improving the AI generative services may use the user input to train the AI. Otherwise, what else does improve mean? I think there needs to be clarification on this sentence. But again, I wouldn't have insight into this without having internal documents. But I can form opinions based on what organizations place on their public-facing websites. And I can give my opinion based on my my expertise knowledge on data protection laws and what is required under the different laws that a business might have to adhere to. You shall use AI generative services in compliance with all the applicable laws, and you shall not use the AI generative services for fully automated decision making. Now, this is a very Euro-centric term that basically outlines how any decision making process that is made without human intervention constitutes automated decision making. I think that I would need more details into how the AI works, how customers anticipate using the product to determine whether or not this is something that an organization can adhere to. Because what you're saying as a customer is you're saying, I'm not going to use your AI for a fully automated decision making. So what types of decisions do you anticipate will be created as a result of your use of the AI generative services? There's lots of questions that the customer needs to answer. And there's also questions that I would have for Semrush if I was their counsel on whether or not the functionality within the AI generative services prohibits customers from using it to make fully automated decision makings. There's a responsibility on the service provider. There's a responsibility on the side of the customer too. That adversely impacts an individual's legal rights or otherwise creates or modifies a binding, enforceable obligation to provide medical advice and medical results interpretation. This is interesting. And I think this is the first experience that I've seen this clause added to terms. So I would be very interested to understand what types of solutions Semrush provides. But I still think it's valuable because whenever I see provisions in a terms that indicate that the audience for the terms are outside of the United States, I'm going to start to call those out, essentially. Our AI generative services are not intended to collect personal data from you, and you must not include personal data in any user input that is passed through our AI generative services unless you comply with all data protection and privacy laws and regulations applicable to the personal information, including providing privacy notices and obtaining consent where required. This is very, very important. So I think this sentence again calls back into, I need to be able to understand the product and service. One of the things that I always ask clients to do is I will send them a very extensive intake form because I want to be able to understand their product fully. What this organization is saying is their AI generative services are not intended to collect personal information from you. Okay, but how else do you log into the system? That would be my first question. And you must not include personal data in any user input unless you've complied with the data protection laws. So essentially what they're saying is you could potentially include personal data, but you have to make sure you have your own compliance with the data protection laws first. But they don't intend for the service to collect personal data from you. But you can input personal data via the user input if you've already complied with the data protection laws. So what does that mean for your organization? Well, you need to look at your geography. You need to look at the thresholds and whether you meet obligations under certain privacy laws. You need to meet your own obligations, which also include vendor due diligence. So there's a lot of different responsibilities that are being placed on you as a customer as a result of signing up for the terms and conditions for this third-party provider. Semrush will process any personal data provided by you for registration for the AI generative services in accordance with our privacy policy. I have a comment to make about this sentence. It's interesting that they've qualified how they process personal data related to registration, but does the privacy policy also outline the processing of personal data that is inputted as a result of user input? Maybe that is addressed in a different document. This review is not for the review of the privacy terms, but this section works hand in hand with the privacy policy and are both insights that should be reviewed by a customer, one during the vendor due diligence process, and then secondly during the contract negotiation if there is a contract. Okay, so they've provided some insights for you to contact them if you have questions about your use of the AI generative services. I am intrigued about this being the only section that really addresses the personal data piece. It may be because this AI doesn't process much personal data, and that's okay. But since it's not intended to collect personal data as a result of the usage of the AI generative services, that may be why this particular terms doesn't discuss it more. I'm going to try and find more companies that we can review that do interact and do process personal data as a result of the use of the AI, because I think it's really important for businesses to understand what it may be that they need to take into consideration if either they are interacting and obtaining services from these companies, and then also what their obligations might be on the customer side, irrespective of how they use the features of the AI. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and I will see you in another one.